Hello again, everyone, and welcome to Quigley on Divorce, a behind-the-scenes look. I'm James Quigley, your host, and I'm excited again for the second time to have a dear friend and tremendous professional, Alex Jacobson of Alex Jacobson Mediation, joining us today. Alex, welcome.
Thank you.
And today is going to be an episode. We've got a couple of episodes we're dealing with that somewhat topical because it's the end of August, and with the end of August comes the start of school. And with the start of school, we have issues that come up in the world of divorce. And again, from the different perspectives, when we deal with these issues in divorce, Alex brings a bit of a different issue or perspective to that, mine being more one of litigation, yours trying to avoid litigation in mediation. So tell the viewers and listeners a little bit about just generally kind of your approach to the mediation process, and then we'll get into a little bit more of the detail of what are some of the issues that you encounter as a mediator this time of year with the beginning of school.
Certainly. Well, when you're dealing with parents in mediation, the goal is to anticipate all possible contingencies in a parenting agreement so that you can avoid going to court. So you're dealing with a regular parenting schedule, you're dealing with the holidays and vacations, transportation issues, all of the things that you need to make your children's lives run smoothly when you're living in two separate households. And the way I operate is to help people navigate the conversation necessary to address all of those issues in an agreement.
So a typical scenario, let's just kind of, and again, by the way, Alex was a tremendous divorce lawyer for almost a dozen years before opening her mediation practice. And so you clearly understand the perspective and have experience in dealing with these issues the way I do. This time of year comes up. And in the context, let's talk first about while a divorce is pending. Sometimes while the case is pending, you don't always have a schedule. You don't always have the rules in place. You don't always have who's doing the transportation set in place. But when school starts, we now have one child at this school, maybe another child at that school. Bedtimes may be different. We have different activities starting up, sports and what have you. And so from my perspective, what ends up happening is if we don't work with someone like Alex in a mediation context outside of court, we're going before a judge and we're saying, Judge, order this person to transport one way or another, or let's make sure that the parenting schedule is such that they're with one parent or another to make their school routine easier.
And I would say, anticipate those issues. The school year is going to come every single year.
True.
You know what activities your children are going to be participating in. You know that Tommy has to get to soccer practice and Susie has to get to cheerleading. And so you have to anticipate those issues. So from my perspective, go to mediation. Your case has already started. Yes, there are many issues that need to be addressed, but you can put a Band-Aid on these types of issues so as to minimize the impact on your children. And you can address who's going to drive who to what practices and to school. And if you and your spouse can agree on nothing, even that today is Friday, hopefully you can come to an agreement that everybody needs to get to their activities and to school on time.
Yeah. And I think what you said too, the most poignant aspect of this is it's really about the kids. And if I'm in court and I'm fighting for my client, I'm advocating zealously for my client, but, sometimes the kids are the ones that get caught in the crosshairs when the parents are fighting in litigation. It's really better for them if you could try to find a way, even like you said, if the parents don't agree, let's at least find some kind of common ground in terms of the schedule, in terms of who's doing what, because ultimately it's going to be better for the kids.
Absolutely. And there are every child has different needs when it comes down to the school year. And as you pointed out, bedtimes and schedules and homework and activities. A judge does not have the time to tailor an order that is to the specific needs of a family. And, they can make general statements about who's going to drive the kids and what time transitions are going to occur. But there may need to be some very specific detail that you can craft in the context of mediation that litigation really just does not provide that opportunity.
I think that's well said, because litigation really is just, for you as parents, it's just going to tell you what to do, what you have to do. Whereas mediation is really the parents working with you to come up with a plan. They all have input. something might work better for that family than what a judge is just going to order. So it really gives them skin in the game, but it also, their voice can be heard in that kind of process.
Absolutely. And as kids attend different schools, there are different types of vacations and breaks and holiday schedules. And all of those little, those finer details need to be addressed in a parenting order for it to run smoothly and for it to operate in such a way that you're avoiding litigation down the road.
Yeah. It's interesting because we talk about sort of the logistical things with schedules and activities and that type of thing, bedtimes, routine during the school week. What's also interesting about back to school is we sometimes get into those other issues such as parent-teacher conferences. When report cards come out, do they get sent to one parent or another? And so I think working in a process out of court, understanding both parents should have access to that information, you helping them kind of come to some protocol almost to how to deal with these things. Because sometimes people can't even sit in a parent-teacher conference at the same time. And so how do you navigate those issues?
Absolutely. And there are financial issues tied to this as well, because how to select the extracurricular activities, who's going to pay for what extracurricular activities. There are inevitably, baseball gear and, uniforms and equipment that are associated with all of these activities that somebody needs to purchase. They need to get to and from somebody's home. And, in mediation, you can set rules for each other, such as if it's not terribly expensive equipment, have 2 sets of everything so that kids aren't having to transport items to and from their parents' homes. And then the parents aren't arguing over who's got what equipment on Wednesday when Tommy needs it for soccer practice.
Yeah. Because again, we've had those cases, right, where kids then they go to practice, but they don't have their gear or they don't have their equipment. And so again, trying to focus on the kids, always keeping that in the forefront. You mentioned something even just about tutoring, and that kind of, makes me think of something I have going on right now where there's even a dispute over whether the parents believe the child needs tutoring. One very much advocating for tutoring, the other one saying the kids are doing fine, their grades are okay. And if you leave that issue to a judge, there's a winner and a loser. And at the end of the day, how much is a judge really going to be able to learn about the necessity of tutoring? Whereas if he sat down with you in mediation, it might be that one parent or the other just needs to hear what the perspective is of the other person. And in their daily lives, they can't do that. They can't communicate. So mediation sort of allows for that communication. And through that, maybe someone comes and says, okay, I get it. Let's do a tutor. And then we can talk about who pays for it.
Right. And in litigation, that process will take months and months and months, because the judge will have to appoint a child's representative to be their eyes and ears to explore the issue, who will then meet with the child, meet with the parents, meet with the teachers, then report back to the court as to whether tutoring is appropriate for this kid. Meanwhile, the school year has come and gone, or you're halfway through the school year, and this child may or may not have received the services that he or she needs. And so that delay is possibly negatively impacting this child. And had they gone through the process of mediation, where they might have determined a protocol for seeing whether tutoring was appropriate, be it meeting with the teachers or doing a special assessment, that would have avoided the entire delay that going through the court has.
And that's that's a reality of any issue in divorce. It's going to take a long time. There's going to be delays. And like you said, some of these issues need to be addressed sooner than later. And even when you talk about a child's representative or a guardian ad litem, that also brings another element of cost. The parents, maybe it's 50-50, maybe one pays more depending on the resources of, dad or mom, but you're adding a third lawyer into the mix that has to be paid. We got to draft pleadings. We got to respond to them. We got to get a hearing on all of this stuff. Like I said, delay, cost versus, hey, let me get on your schedule for next week. Let's find time that works for everybody, and let's really start addressing the issue. So great point. And I think that's a good concept of mediation just in general, whether it's back to school or any other issues, is mediation can short circuit the delays in the court system. And in many respects, if the parties are agreeable and they work hard with you in this, can probably cut down costs of the process as well.
And avoid the impact on the kids, because when you have a child's representative or a guardian ad litem, they're going to meet with the kids. Sure. And you can remove the children from the process as much as possible when you're in mediation.
Yeah, really great idea. And that's, I think when you start talking about mediation in school issues, it's interesting just having a conversation with you, because you realize there's so many issues just attendant to this time of year. You're starting up, and by the way, from a kid's perspective, there's a sense of enthusiasm, and you want them to be able to have the good feelings, knowing that mom and dad might both be at our activities. How does that work? When we sit and talk with you in mediation, can we conduct ourselves such that we both can sit next to each other at the events? Can we go to that teacher conference? And so a lot of things to think about. And to your point, trying to do that proactively is really something people ought to think about, so you're not missing the resolution because you're in court, it takes too long. Think about it in advance and try to address that.
And that's absolutely correct. And this doesn't just need to happen during a divorce or before the divorce is finalized. You can meet with a mediator at the beginning of a school year, to look at the school calendar and plot out how the year is going to go, because inevitably vacations or school days off need to be addressed. And, all of a sudden you have a teacher in-service day on a Monday, and whose day is that with the kids? Who's going to be responsible for childcare when, both parents have to go to work? All of these details that you try to anticipate in a final divorce judgment, you may or may not be able to. And if you're revisiting these issues on a yearly basis, it may be 1 or 2 hours with a mediator, but then you've got a roadmap for how the school year is going to go, and the children can anticipate, who am I going to be with for Thanksgiving this year? And how is my winter break going to go? And will I be traveling for spring break? And then they can focus on being students and children rather than being concerned about managing the relationship between their parents.
Yeah. And you mentioned even things like, school holidays. Even think about, we're in Chicago, snow days, cold days, we have them. How do you plan for those? What if it's my day, but I'm supposed to work? Do we have a protocol set up, and who's the child care provider in those instances? When you talk about vacations, winter break, spring break, as a parent, you'd like to know in advance, I don't want to have to wait until winter break gets here to start planning a vacation. I'd like to know that we've kind of worked that out. We have a schedule in place. You're going to take the first week, I'll take the second week, however that works. Okay, now I can go ahead and make my plans.
But even more drilled down than that, how do you define first week and second week? Is it, what is the midway point of winter break? To think that a judge has the time to drill down with that kind of detail, it may or may not happen. And in mediation, you can say, on this particular school year, this day is the day that we are going to transition the children at this time, at this location. And then there's no ambiguity.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting too, because in all my years of doing this, to your point about knowing things in advance, Christmas is on December 25th every year. But lo and behold, you get to the middle and end of Christmas, and all of a sudden people are fighting about that. And that's really, my experience has always been, judges are very black and white on that. Somebody gets Christmas Eve, someone gets Christmas Day, if you don't agree, and it flip-flops. Sometimes some families have, they always celebrate Christmas Eve. And so again, whereas a judge really isn't going to weigh in too much on that kind of stuff, they're just sort of going to split it down the middle. In mediation, you can really have those conversations about traditions and family, historical events, because that's also important to children as well.
Of course. You think about 4th of July traditions and, all of those things that happen during the year, and you want to preserve those for children as much as you possibly can. And, even if you alternate even years and odd years for holidays, You may still designate one particular holiday to one parent because family traditions for that particular holiday are strong and you want to maintain that for the kids. There's nothing wrong with that. It's in fact very positive for the kids, and judges are more inclined to just, as you say, keep it black and white.
Yeah.
You have even years and you have odd years,
Yeah.
without regard for family traditions.
Yeah. So let me kind of shift a little bit, and maybe this isn't as specific to back to school, but more generally in mediation. So you've worked in some very high conflict situations, right? Mm-hmm. What do you say to the individual who might be watching and listening and saying, it sounds really good, but my spouse will never talk to me, even if we get into, I can't be in the same room with my spouse. Sometimes we have those situations. How do you manage the process? And can you really, when you have that level of discord where the parents literally can't sit in the same room together, how do you manage that?
Even in the most high conflict cases, it is possible to reach a resolution on things like holiday schedules and all of the things that you need to include in a parenting agreement or financial issues. It's my job as the mediator to understand the personalities in the room, and if they can't be in the same room, to help navigate the conversation while they're in different rooms. And I'll shuttle in between the rooms and break down the issues and discuss with mom issues with dad, and be the voice in between them. And once they see a comprehensive agreement that they have reached, notwithstanding that they weren't sitting in the same room doing it, it's rather empowering, and actually it sets a positive positive tone for moving forward, because they're able to come to an agreement even if they're not in the same room. Yeah. And that's my job as the mediator, to help navigate that conversation and understand the personalities at play.
When have you ever had situations where it's beneficial to the parties to actually, if they have lawyers, to have the lawyers participate in that process with you?
Certainly. I mean, there are situations where a particular spouse doesn't feel comfortable stating their position while their spouse is in the same room, or may not have the words to state their position, or frankly may not be well versed in the finances, and may not understand what they're entitled to or what their obligations are. So having an attorney present may be quite beneficial in those instances, to help that person have a voice in the process.
Yeah, and I think that's, I'd say a general rule of thumb, kind of from our perspective, when the issues are really parenting issues, like, we gave some examples of how do we deal with holidays and vacation time and pick up and drop offs and stuff like that. I generally think a lawyer doesn't need to be in those kind of mediation processes. But when you mention finances, I think it really is important. And again, going back to the back to school stuff, it's an interesting issue sometimes around private school. And, here living in the city of Chicago, private school is a big deal, and it's not inexpensive. Who pays for that? These are issues, though, that can be mediated. Mm-hmm. Again, hopefully before they're in school. Are we going to private school? Are we going to public school? Can they get into, some other school, whether it be a charter school or anything else? Let's figure that out, because one parent might come from a perspective of, well, I went to public schools and public schools are fine. Another said, well, I did private school. So helping people even deal with the selection of schools for the children, and whether or not, the parties are going to have a financial obligation. Those are things that you can deal with in mediation as well.
Right, because it's not just, you may think that when I'm referring to somebody who doesn't particularly, who needs an attorney in mediation, you might think of somebody who doesn't understand their finances, but it may in fact be the other spouse who understands their finances quite well, but may not understand what their obligations are. And as the mediator, I'm not advocating for one party or the other. And so it is really important to have attorneys present in those instances, because they're able to advise their client on what their obligations are and what their rights are.
Right. And that's interesting, because your job isn't to, as a mediator, to not necessarily tell them, hey, legally you may not have a legal obligation to pay for private school. I mean, your effort is to try to help them come to an agreement, regardless of whether someone might have an obligation or not.
Exactly.
And that's interesting. So it just even talking about the school issue and the selection of it, it's interesting because I just had a case where parents had two kids in high school, one in private school, and the other child didn't want to go to private school and had her own reasons in terms of having a peer group, feeling she fit in better with that group. And so that was a situation where, the parties themselves were able to reach those agreements. But that's something where I think in mediation, you can really dive deeper into those kind of issues where a judge, again, is going to have limited capacity to really understand those deeper issues, probably involve a child's representative or a GAL. But again, the more you talk about these issues, the more you realize there's really not no issue that mediation can't really deal with. True?
Mediation can't deal with the cases where one spouse wants to extract a pound of flesh from the other. Mediation
we have some of those, yeah.
And there always will be those kinds of cases. Yeah. And mediation isn't appropriate for those cases. And the courtroom is where they should be, right. Because that's what they're looking to do. But you are right. I mean, even in the most high conflict cases, or cases that are really extremely complex, mediation is actually better suited than the courtroom.
Yeah. So I guess just kind of as we wrap things up, you mentioned before planning for this stuff. In your experience, if somebody is thinking, and again, we understand school starting now, probably not too late to deal with some issues, but in an ideal world, when would you have people reach out to you to start dealing with, for example, the back to school type of issues that many of which we've already talked about today?
I mean, the sooner the better. Always, but if they're just starting the divorce process and there is no comprehensive parenting agreement in place, you can meet with a mediator and address temporary issues, put a temporary Band-Aid on it. This is how we're going to deal with things for this school year. And then that can be a roadmap as to what you use for a final agreement going forward. But there is no time better than now to address things for the school year, because you don't want to leave anything unclear, because it really wreaks havoc on the kids.
Yeah. And even like you said, once there's a final agreement in place, probably a good idea even to schedule things. Hey, we've got an agreement in place. Summer's going along, but maybe there's some, lack of clarity in the agreement, or we've had this agreement in place for a number of years, but guess what? Now I've got a child going into high school. I've got a child who's now in this particular activity. Probably a good idea to revisit
Absolutely.
Old agreements just to make sure that we've got a clear understanding moving forward of what makes sense for the kids.
I mean, they're living documents. I mean, and kids change and their needs change and their desires change. And you have to, as parents, change with the kids and understand that their needs are growing. So a parenting agreement established when a child is 2 is not going to address all the things that the kid needs when he or she is 13. And so meeting August 1 of every year to map out what the school year is going to look like is always a good idea.
Good planning. So for the viewers and listeners that might be thinking, there might be some that aren't even in a divorce process yet. Could they engage your services for mediation without there being a divorce filed?
Absolutely. I mean, I can help them come to an agreement as to how the school year is going to operate. I mean, in terms of the enforceability of that agreement, I mean, it would have to be a court order to have that be enforceable by a judge. But certainly I can help them navigate the conversation of what their school year is going to look like and how to make it run as smoothly as possible.
Terrific. And if someone wanted to reach out to you, what would be the best way to get in touch with you to be able to schedule a mediation, learn more about the process?
My website is jacobsonmediationgroup.com, and I can be reached at 312-877-5092.
That's terrific. And as much as I deal in the world of litigation, we almost as a matter of course, especially when children are involved, we always recommend mediation as a first step. Like you said, it doesn't always work. Sometimes the level of discord is just so bad that it's just not going to work. But really, it's really a process everyone should look to engage in with children. Work out the logistical stuff. Don't tie up the court's time. Don't waste your money paying lawyers fighting in court on those issues. So I really, really highly encourage all of you, if you're thinking about some of these issues, even if it's not back to school, if it's anything related to your family, for your children, maybe even your finances, again, I would always suggest having a lawyer part of that, but strongly recommend that you reach out to Alex. She's terrific. She's smart and can really help you out. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.